Okay, so it's at the top of the hour, so we're going to get started. My name is Carol Wilkins, and I am the project manager here, or special project manager here with MIA, and I'm pleased to bring to you today Karen Kirk. Karen is a geologist who loves to help others gain an appreciation for rocks. She has been a geologist and an educator for over 20 years. And I'm quoting from her here. She says, "I'm passionate about geology, and quite simply, I love rocks and I love to teach." With numerous scientific presentations and publications to her name, she brings a different perspective to our industry. Several years ago, she began contributing to the House forums, helping people understand and select natural stone that is right. Because of her ability to solve geological mysteries, she was given the name Rock Whisperer. She just completed her first TED Talk earlier this month, and be prepared to enjoy and learn something new from our webinar series today. Also note that this webinar program is part of a three-part program. Part 2 and 3 will be on May 17th and May 24th, respectively. Karen, welcome.
Thank you, Carol. And I just have to start off by saying I'm thrilled to do this. Carol revealed my deepest secret. I love rocks, and it's really fun to share them with anybody who cares about them. Typically in my life that's been students, but this is cool. I found a whole other audience of people who also love rocks. So I'm going to go through these first few screens, are somewhat of a recap of what you just heard, a little bit about me. So I've taught geology face-to-face, online, and now I teach geology to people who love to talk about countertops. And I do that so far via the House Forum, and which formerly was the Gardenwood Forum, but now we do it through the Marble Institute of America. So thank you, Carol, for making that connection. And so we all have this thing in common that brings us here today, is that natural stone has a use in our life. What I'd like to do through this series is not necessarily make you think about it scientifically or bore you with terminology or you have to see rocks the way we see rocks, but just to sort of share the other side of the industry, really, of how geologists go about looking at rocks, what they mean to us, and share with you, I think, just the most relevant parts of geology that it can help you do your job better and have more fun when you're working with customers or working in the fabrication shop, things like that, so you understand rocks just a little bit more. So our objective here, follow right along with that. We want to look at what do rocks tell us about how they formed, what qualities of rocks are going to make them good or maybe less good for how we want to use them. Today we're going to just talk about granite and sort of what that means in terms of igneous and metamorphic rocks. And our last goal is really the important one, which is rocks are awesome. So I'm starting with that because it's awesome. Yeah, so you've probably gathered in the first few minutes that I'm pretty enthusiastic about this. But I think we all share some affinity for natural stone. And what I think is cool about it is that all rocks tell you something. And if you look at this picture, it's a picture of a beach. It's probably about where you'd like to be right now, spring weather, and can be really fickle. It's actually sort of some combination of raining and snowing here. And man, that beach looks really nice. And it does. From the geologist's point of view, I look at that beach and I think of, oh, what kind of rocks would form there? That beach is going to make future sandstone and future limestone. And then you can take that in the other direction too. You can look at a piece of sandstone and go, oh man, that was a beach. I bet that was really nice about 250 million years ago. So rocks are a product of their environment. And the other way of looking at that is that they tell us something about that environment. And that's what geologists love to figure out. Every rock has a story to tell. So you look at something violent like a volcano, and geologists think, first of all, totally cool. We love volcanoes. But also that lava that's spilling down the flank there, that's a whole other kind of rock, and that's going to tell us something about that environment. So that's what geology is. And the cool thing about the building stone trade is that you bring these rocks right into people's everyday environments. You put a rock on your kitchen countertop, and that's really neat because you have a little piece of Earth's history. You have minerals and textures and things that tell you something about where it formed and about the history of the Earth. And which is why I would be a terrible salesperson for rocks, because I would bore everybody all day long about all the cool things that they really don't need to know. So that's where HOWS has helped me along. I saw this, you can see the date here, 2012. Someone had just put in a brand new countertop. It was not behaving like they were hoping, and they were posing the question, hey, should I cover it with saran wrap? And to me, that was an interesting red flag that something has gone wrong here. This person has ended up with a rock that is not what they expected. And saran wrap was sort of a last ditch to try to make this work out. So this particular rock, Super White, you've probably heard of it, is an interesting one. So I went to my rock yard and said, hey, what's going on with Super White? Can you give me a piece? Can I check it out? So I did, and I started figuring out what was going on with these rocks and then posting answers to questions here on the Garden Web, and that's become, you know, my like part-time hobby job. There's lots of interest in that. So that's sort of the background to get us into our topic. Carol, do you want to jump in with our first poll? See what you guys think about rocks so far? There it is.
Sure. So if you can take a couple seconds just to answer the poll. Yep. Yep. And I'll post the results here shortly. Granite is beating everyone out.
Oh, well, that's our topic for today, so good.
Yeah, yeah, okay. We're almost at 100% voted. A couple more people.
Do I get to vote?
90%. No.
I love them all. I couldn't pick one.
Okay, so I have about 90% voted. So let's see. I'm going to close it here in a minute.
And then, so can only you see the results? Because I can't.
No, I will post it. I will post it live.
Oh, I see.
A couple people are still answering questions, so give it one more second. Okay, here we go. Okay, continue, Karen. My screen just went out, but I'll post it here in a second.
Okay, just jump in.
Okay.
Now we're going to be in super suspense. Cool. Okay, so that's our warm-up, and now we'll get into a little bit more about what makes rocks. Some of this, depending on how long you've been working in the industry. Oh, here we go. Oh, marble made a surge there. Nice. So, yeah, this seems to parallel probably about how they their popularity in the marketplace as well. So today we're going to get into granite and everything about it, and then marble, quartzite, soapstone are all for next week, or a couple weeks from now. Oops. I need to go back to my, it drops me out of my, there we go. Rock ingredients. All right. So rocks are made of minerals, and it's the minerals in part that determined how a rock is going to behave. It sort of tells you, it's kind of the ingredients. It gets you down inside the rock a little bit. These are just some examples, quartz, calcite, garnet, of common ones that we see. So the minerals are going to tell us the color, and sometimes the color is diagnostic, like garnet is almost always this burgundy color. The mineral chlorite is what makes soapstone green. The color is not that diagnostic. Feldspar, which is the most common mineral in the Earth's crust, can be a huge range of colors. Quartz can be a range of colors, but in the rocks we deal with here, it's normally white or sort of a glassy gray color. So that's one thing that minerals help us with. Another is the hardness. And so hardness is just simply how hard is it to scratch a rock. So talc is the softest one, and we go on up the scale. I didn't correlate these with the numbers on those hardness scale, but these are just arranged in order from soft to hard. Garnet being way up on the hard end of the minerals that we see for decorative stones. And then minerals tell us how they act with acids. That's a big problem for kitchen and bathroom and things like that. And so calcite and dolomite are the two minerals that dissolve readily when exposed to household acids, and those are the minerals that make up limestone and marble. The strength of a rock is not necessarily related to the minerals themselves. It can be, but it's important to clarify the difference between the hardness and the durability. So the hardness is just how resistant is it to scratching. As you drag your cast iron pot across the countertop, is it going to scratch or not? That's the minerals. But the durability of the rock, is it going to chip on the corners? Is it going to break if someone sits on it? That's also determined by how well those minerals are stuck together. And by what process are they stuck together? It differs with different rocks. And so here's some cool examples. Quartz sandstone on the left. Quartz is an extremely hard mineral, one of our hardest ones. But in a quartz sandstone, in some quartz sandstones, not all, they're not stuck together very well. And in this photo, you can see that someone just carved their heart, just showing their love for the rock, right into the rock. So it's hard minerals, but not very well stuck together. Some quartz sandstones are extremely well stuck together, and you don't have this problem at all. So you have a hard mineral and they're well stuck together. Next, the other side of the slide here, soapstone, opposite end of the spectrum, very soft mineral, but very well stuck together. So it's dense and it resists staining, but it's super scratchable. So minerals alone don't tell you the whole picture. It's the minerals and how they're stuck on there. Some rocks have their own reasons for not being strong and durable. The mica minerals, so mica, anytime you see a rock that really looks like it's made out of glitter, that's probably mica, because it's a little flat shape, just like a piece of glitter. And so those minerals are very planar and flaky. And so anytime those have a chance to sort of creep out of the corner or the top surface of a countertop, they will. And they also tend to split along those layers sometimes. So the mineral itself then does have a property that makes a rock less ideal. Any rock that's layered, and lots of rocks are layered, things always want to split out along those layers. So that can determine the orientation that you're going to put it on the countertop, things like that. And some rocks are extremely hard, and they're hard in every direction. So it doesn't have any layering like this quartzite here. And sometimes when a rock is just super, super strong, it can just be brittle because those planes of weakness, it doesn't have anywhere where it can sort of take up some slack. And so that makes these rocks almost act a little glassy, as in glass is very strong, but it chips. And quartz chemically is pretty much the same as glass, so it can have a little bit, some of those same traits. So those are some of the things that make a rock less strong. Here's why we love granite. Granite is part of the igneous family of rocks, and it is a strong rock. The mineral grains are very well stuck together, and almost every mineral in granite is in and of itself hard. So it's got lots of things going for it, and that's why it's so popular. So now we'll get into a little bit of sort of our family portrait of different kinds of rocks, and we'll put granite and other rocks kind of on the map here. So we think of three rock families: igneous, metamorphic, sedimentary. And how do they relate to each other? In school we teach the rock cycle. Here's a slightly more formed version of the rock cycle. Any rock, if you melt it, turns into an igneous rock. Any rock, if you break it into bits and pieces and lay down those bits and pieces, called sediments, you can turn that into a sedimentary rock. And any rock, if you torture it and bury it and heat it up, but you don't melt it, you just torture it, that becomes a metamorphic rock. And so any rock can turn into any other kind of rock. That's the rock cycle. To put a perspective on the different definitions of granite, to geologists, granite is just one type of igneous rock. So it's one character within this family. For the building trade, it's a different definition. Granite is all types of igneous rock. But then it's a bunch of different types of metamorphic rocks too, except for the ones that are sort of their own characters, like marble and soapstone and slate and quartzite. So granite has a sort of split definition between all igneous and some metamorphic. We'll get deeper into this. And then I'll pull my judgment call here. Sedimentary rocks, nobody, not even, not geologists and not the trade calls sedimentary rocks granite. So that's something to look out for. That's usually just a miscategorization. So let's check out igneous rocks a little bit. So igneous rocks come from molten rocks, molten magma. It can be lava on the surface or it can be magma under the surface of the earth. Igneous rocks, by and large, super tough. Mineral grains that are tightly locked together, typically not very porous. The minerals in igneous rocks are hard. They don't get scratched very easily. The minerals in igneous rocks won't etch when exposed to normal household acids. And that's why they're so darn good. They've got all the right properties to hold up well and take a lot of abuse. We can go over those same points here looking at this cool close-up picture, and it can show you what I mean. Because my favorite outcome for this would be that you guys go back to your showrooms and start looking at rocks and going, oh yeah, that's what she was talking about. So you can kind of get personal here. So looking at this is granite. This is geologist's granite. You can see that the pieces fit closely together, that they all are stitched right in there together, and that there's no spaces or layers in there. Most igneous rocks are made mostly of feldspar, and feldspar can be a variety of colors. So this one's got lots of pink feldspar in there, which that red arrows are pointing to. It's got some white feldspar, and both of those have a similar kind of blocky shape. And if you hold them up to the light, you can actually also see these faint little lines in them sometimes. Quartz is another component of true granite and of a lot of the sort of the bigger family of granite rocks. And quartz is usually gray or clear, and it's not at all blocky. It's sort of a blob, and it's really glassy. You can see into it. You can see right through it somewhat. And then you got your dark minerals, very technical term there. There's a whole bunch of different minerals that can make things dark. They can be biotite and hornblende. You guys don't need to know the mineral names, but that's what makes those darker specks in your granite. And the way geologists look at igneous rocks is they go in this spectrum from light on the rhyolite and granite end of the scale on through dark down to gabbro and basalt. And that just tells us what magma made it. So you melt different types of rocks, you get different kinds of magma that has different minerals and then translates into different colors. I live right near Yellowstone Park, which is made out of rhyolite, which is a terrible rock for a countertop because it's basically like very ashy, and it's a really explosive rock. And rhyolite is usually a sign of a dramatic, explosive environment, one that we're really not looking forward to when it happens again in Yellowstone. But rocks like granite form under the earth or within the Earth's crust, and they cool over long periods of time. And rhyolite and granite are made out of the same minerals, but they cool at different rates. So that's what gives us these textures. By and large, big crystals mean the rock cooled deep underground and slowly. And then small, fine-grained rocks cooled quickly on or near the surface. And magma that erupts and spills out onto the surface is lava. And if it stays down inside the surface, then it cools slowly. And as a geologist, I would call that an intrusive rock, where it's just intruding its way inside layers of the Earth's crust. And we have these cool examples of huge crystals, and that's called a pegmatite, when the crystals are like the size of your fist or bigger. If you extend the logic on the previous slide, you would say, oh, that cooled very, very, very slowly. Maybe, but also tends to be a magma that's got water in it, and water is like your social facilitator. Water takes ions and introduces them to other ions that they think it'll get along with, and it allows crystals to just form more quickly. And so water just kind of facilitates this process and lets really big crystals grow. Pegmatites are incredibly cool because they're just big old hunks, and you can see all the features, and feldspars, you can see the little parallel lines they got going. In quartz, it looks really glassy, and so it kind of amplifies all the minerals you already have. So pegmatites are definitely popular for the drama. So now we've got a couple slides of just things you see around your showrooms, and what are they? So you see a lot of these ones, these pink blocky crystals, and that is pink feldspar that's rich in potassium. This particular rock, geologists would call it granite. But this blocky crystal can be lots of colors. It can be pink, it can be white, it can be any shade of gray. But the pink one is a definite call out, like, yep, that's that potassium-rich feldspar. That same mineral can take on this bluish, greenish, grayish iridescence. And again, it's feldspar, just different colors. We would call it labradorite. It's one of the trade rocks with that made out of that is blue pearl, and that's super popular. Although it's kind of for flashing, not everybody loves it, but that's where that comes from. And that's the end of igneous rocks. So Carol, why don't you jump in with the second poll? Okay.
And we'll give a couple minutes for you to answer the questions. And we're at about 35%, 47% voted. I'll give it a couple more seconds here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, we're almost at 100% voted. Okay, so the results are
oh, nice. Cool. So we're looking at things that are unique and interesting, and the idea of calming and durable is less important. So we have sort of the creative outlook on rocks. Cool. Nice. Back to, great. Okay. So we will now move on to metamorphic rocks, the poor tortured rocks. So in this schematic diagram, you can see this little wedge-shaped section of rock in the middle, and it has all these wavy lines in it. It's kind of a cool schematic of this poor thing is like stuck in this collision zone of tectonic plates that are colliding. It's like sort of the collateral damage stuck in the middle. There's magma coming up through here, and that's heating it even more and adding a strange chemical broth to the mix. So this is what I was saying before, that metamorphic rocks are any old rock that ends up getting tortured. So they all start out as something. They start out as some kind of rock, and then they get exposed to these tough conditions. That's burial, that's high pressure, that's interacting with the chemicals. And because of that, it changes them. They'll change textures. They sometimes get a whole new kind of mineral, sometimes not. Sometimes they keep the same minerals, but they just get rearranged. And typically they get denser because they're being compressed down. And this swirly linear pattern is a common theme to just about all metamorphic rocks, and that's a result of that high pressure. A revisit to our rock cycle diagram. Metamorphic rocks, basically you torture any other kind of rock and you can get a metamorphic rock. So let's go through a couple of those. Gneiss. So if you want to really confuse people, they go, what's that? And you go, oh, well, it's gneiss. And you're like, well, I know it's nice, but what is it? So it's gneiss with a G. Gneiss with a G is sort of your classic metamorphic rock. You guys will call this granite. Starts out as granite, or maybe it starts out as sandstone. Could go either way. But you can see that this rock has been squeezed and compressed. You can see this sort of taffy-like wavy texture. And what's happening is the minerals, because of that pressure, are getting organized into layers of similar minerals. And then the whole thing gets squeezed and stretched. And so you get these, because of the organized layers, you get a zone of pinkish white and a zone of gray, and then pinkish white and then gray. And so it kind of makes these stripes. And then you take the stripes and you squeeze them some more, it swirls. So that's how you start out as granite and make it into gneiss. And you can see that the granite I was showing before with the pink blocky crystals and things like that, overall it's got the same look. It's got the same colors, the same minerals. They're just arranged differently because of their morphism. Here's another one. This is a common rock when people want something white, but they don't necessarily want marble. A lot of these white granites are a rock that we call granulite. And again, it starts out like a regular granite, but because of this squeezing and squishing, it gets a linear fabric, and sometimes it's wavy and sometimes it's straight. And then you get this new mineral, garnet, and garnet almost always tells you the rock has been exposed to these metamorphic conditions, and particularly at a deep burial, a lot of pressure. So granulite, pretty close to granite, but it's gone a little bit down that path of metamorphic. Migmatite. Migmatite means mixed rock. This one in the trade is called Cosmos, and this one's kind of cool because it starts out as granite or sandstone. It doesn't really matter, but anyway, you bury it and squish it and heat it so much that it actually starts to melt. And when that happens, the first mineral to melt is quartz, and so you actually get these sort of nodules or bands of liquid quartz inside the rest of the rock, which is solid. It's not too different from, say, a chocolate chip cookie, where if you put that in the microwave for a couple of seconds, it's the chocolate chip that starts to melt first, and everything else stays sort of soft but still solid. That's what migmatite is. So the quartz turns liquid, and everything else stays soft but solid. And then you take that rock and you squish it up, and it makes these crazy patterns with these liquidy bands of quartz, making really wild patterns. So people who like that high movement kind of rock love this. It's quite dramatic. Slate is sort of run-of-the-mill metamorphic rock. It started out as shale, and it got more compressed, and it still kind of looks a lot like shale, but it's just harder, a little denser than shale. Schist, if you take shale, oops, sorry about that, that's my other phone ringing. My husband will answer it. If you take shale and keep heating it, the crystals will grow into the mica family, and mica is again the ones that look real glittery. And again, you can add garnets into schist, and so they're hard to see on here because this is so reflective. But garnets, oh dear, sorry about that. Garnets are these little round shapes in the midst of the rock. Because mica minerals are so flat, or this rock is really flat, almost like fish scales, and then garnets form these little beads almost inside of that. So that is a schist. And then these rocks form on a spectrum. So if you start out with shale, which is the rock that's not really good for much of anything, it's made out of sort of weak clay minerals, and you expose it to a little bit of metamorphism, you get slate. And then if you keep going, it gets buried more deeply or heated up more. It turns into a rock called stillite, which is often still called slate in the trade. This is a common tile rock, and it's sort of a spectrum. Slate turns into stillite when it gets this luster that looks a little bit sort of waxy, not quite towards glittery, but just this little sort of satin sheen. And then if you keep on cranking on that thing, the little satiny crystals are basically the beginning of those mica crystals growing. They get bigger, and now you have schists. And if you keep on going, that'll turn into gneiss. And if you keep on going, you'll melt part of it, and that'll be migmatite. And if you keep on going, you're going to melt the rock completely. And so here's a little quiz. I know I can't hear you guys, but if you melt a rock, then what kind of rock do you get? And hopefully you're all thinking, oh, I knew that one. That's how you get an igneous rock. So there's a spectrum of metamorphism. You can torture a rock more and more and more and more until parts of it melt, until eventually all of it melts, and you go back to an igneous rock. So that's sort of an up-close and personal example of how that rock's like. So that's it for part one. I want to leave time for questions. What we'll do in part two is pick up from here, talk about sedimentary rocks, and then the metamorphic rocks that are not granite. Marble, quartzite, soapstone, etc. And then part three is all about the diagnostics. How do you learn about these rocks when you have one sitting in front of you in your showroom? How do you start to figure it out? And part three is also a great time to bring questions about all the weird rocks that you have. So, questions. Carol, do we have questions?
Earlier, Deborah had her hands raised. I'm going to unmute her here.
Okay.
Deborah, can you hear me?
I can, but I didn't have a question.
Oh, okay. You have your hands raised. No problem. No problem. And then Marina, she had her hands raised. I'm not sure if she had a question, but I will unmute her. Marina, did you have a question earlier? Mariana?
No, we are okay.
Okay. Okay. Chandra, did you have a question? Chandra? Let's see. Oh, she said no. Okay. I don't think we have 2 minutes. Dan? Let's see. Dan, did you have a question?
I did.
Okay, go ahead.
Quick question. Does foliated or non-foliated have anything to do with the porosity of a stone?
Oh, that's a great question. Definitely it does. So foliated basically means layered, and often we use that one specifically talking about metamorphic rocks, how they tend, because they're compressed, they tend to rearrange along layers. But really any rock can be foliated if it's layered like that. And absolutely, those layers are where the pores are. So water and other fluids are going to want to travel across those layers. Sometimes the rock can heal up, and so it can become foliated but not particularly porous. So it's not a guarantee that if it's foliated it's porous, but certainly any rock that's layered is going to, those planes form spots where the rock is certainly more porous. Does that help, or do you have a more specific question behind that?
No, I mean, at some point I would like to know if the industry in general, the stone industry in general, would be able to identify stones that are foliated versus non-foliated, because there's a big gray area in terms of moisture-sensitive stones that can be used for exterior that have less capillary action to them versus stones that can be used in wet areas. And I don't know if that connection helps, but if it does, that might be something where the industry could look at and see if we could kind of connect the dots on those.
Yeah, that makes lots of sense to me, particularly for exterior when you have that slow creep of moisture and then frost and things like that that can undermine rocks. And also in exterior how they're exposed on all sides so that the water can get in. And it's funny because we often like the rocks that want to be flat, for exterior, for stacking walls and things like that. We love the rocks that want to be flat rectangle shapes because they cleave, along those nice planes. But that's the same reason gets us into trouble with the porosity. So any rock that prefers to be layered also is going to be weak across those layers. So you've got the same principle, the same property being both an advantage and a disadvantage.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Thanks, Dan. So I've got a number of questions regarding the presentation, and yes, most all of our webinars will be recorded, and you'll get a copy of it probably about an hour or two after the session ends. I have a question here. What rock type does black absolute granite falls under?
That's a great question, a really popular one. That is rock, the closest one we could probably just say gabbro, which is an igneous rock. I'm going to zip back up. So on the spectrum of igneous rocks where they're very light on one end and very dark on the other, this rock gabbro here, that looks a lot like absolute black, doesn't it? Sort of fine-grained and very dark, but not so fine-grained like basalt is the other rock that's similar to this, and it's the same ingredients, the same color, just a little bit finer grained. So absolute black is somewhere between gabbro and basalt, and you wouldn't be wrong for using either of those names. It's somewhere in between the two.
Okay, I've got one more. How is granite flamed, and what can you do to protect it?
How is it, what?
Flamed? Flamed is the question. How is granite flamed, and what can you do to protect it?
Planed as in, I guess I'm not quite understanding the question. Like as in you'd want to make it plainer?
I'm not sure. Let's see.
Can that person type in a clarification?
Yeah. Okay, so we'll move on for the time being. Let's see. It says flamed is a type of finish. Someone typed in. It's like leathering.
Gotcha. Okay. So right, I'm not gonna have a great answer for that because I'm not a fabricator. So I don't know. But basically, I can tell you this: all those surface treatments don't inherently change the properties of the rock itself a whole lot. So if it's made up of tightly bound, interlocking, hard minerals to begin with, no matter what surface you put on it, it's still going to act like that. And if it's made of wimpy minerals that are not well put together, then the surface treatment won't change that either. It has a fairly subtle effect on the rock itself.
Okay. I have another question specifically to quartzite, vein cut, and macubus. I know versus crosscut. Calcutta is one cut more porous than the other. And that's a question from Alice.
No. That's just cut. It's the same, sort of, it's like the last question where the property of the rock is the property of the rock. The porosity in that case doesn't change. That rock is layered, but not like really strongly layered. So it's not going to change. But those quartz grains are going to have the same relationship with their neighbors, whether you look at them from one angle or the other angle. So it doesn't change it a lot.
Okay, so we have Kenny, you have your hands raised. Did you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Her question on the flaming granite is where you use a high heat to actually go over the surface of the granite, and it causes chips to pop out of it, to where you actually have a very rough finish. Use more northern areas for, where exterior stone, where you need a rougher finish. As far as taking care of it, it'd be a normal impregnator. As far as what it does to the granite, I don't know if it does much to it, except that it causes the chips to blow out. So it actually explodes the granite on the surface.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you so
I
much,
know nothing
Kenny.
about that. Thank you. I've never heard that. I'll have to go look into that.
Up north. I've done it before. They make special tools to do it after you lay it.
Yeah.
Then you run these tools over it. There's like little flame ends that hook up to a propane tank. Then you can do it with a propane torch, but if you're doing a large area, you don't want to. But and then it's just normal sealing, impregnating, so that water doesn't penetrate in and into the stone.
Okay. Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you. I'm gonna read more about that.
I have a couple more questions coming in. Chandra wants to know, can we know how a geographic location can change types of rocks found and why they are different from each continent?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. Thank you. It really doesn't matter. That you hear that a lot. You hear, oh, well, this is a Brazilian quartzite, which is totally different from an Italian quartzite, right? I assume that's the question you're asking. That's generally not true. Remember that first slide of that lovely-looking beach? Rock is only reflective of its environment that it formed on, and it really doesn't matter where on the globe that is, because the variability is much smaller than that, smaller than the continent. So it's like to say, could you find a nice beach in South America, and could you find a nice beach in Italy? The answer would be yes, of course you could. So it's resist the temptation to lump rocks by continent, or by country of origin, because it's not really, that doesn't really hold up. It's more the individual quarry, the individual rock itself, what minerals is it made out of, how are those minerals arranged, and that doesn't really track by geography necessarily. So it's, in this case, we want the geology and not the geography. So the geology tells us about the rock specifically. The geography tells us where it's from, but that doesn't really count for much. And I'm really glad you asked that, because I see that over and over again. I go, who knows?
Okay, thank you, Karen.
So okay, good. Okay, I think that's it as far as questions. If you have any more questions, Kenny, your hands are still, did you raise your hand?
I'm sorry.
Did you have another question?
No, I didn't. I just forgot to lower it.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so I think that's it then for today. And again, I want to thank everyone participating, especially the ones asking questions. We love questions. And just to note that part 2, we did have an earlier question from Brenda Edwards regarding limestone, and maybe that's something we'll touch on in the next series, either part 2 or part 3, but we will make sure that's covered. And then as Karen says in part 3, definitely bring whatever questions you have. If something that she didn't cover, bring your questions and we'll be happy to take care of those for you. With that, I'm going to close the session out, unless Karen, did you have something else you wanted to say?
I also have a quick question about part 3. If you have a rock that you have a question about, submit a photo. Is that possible, Carol?
Yeah,
they could even email it to you or to me. I'm not well versed in the industry names, but with a picture I can at least figure something out. But if you just say, oh, what about cloud white? What is that? I have no idea. But if you send me a picture, I can probably help you figure out at least something about it. So think about weird rocks you've got, think about getting pictures of them and letting us know beforehand, and we'll see if we can illuminate them a little bit.
Okay. So that's it. And again, I just want to say thank you to everyone. Really appreciate your participation and look forward to seeing you again, or hearing from you again on the 17th of May. Same time, same place. Thanks a lot.
Awesome.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.